If 17 milliseconds once took your brothers from you, would you dare touch the switch again? Inside NATO's Grey Wind base, a Reaper sits dead link 5 minutes before the exercise. Voices clash. Procedure. Blame. Excuses. Avery Hale says nothing. Pale skin hair tied back, eyes steady. She kneels, opens the panel, and 1, 2, 3 hot swap the module. Quick INS, realign, rekey the timing. The console blinks from red to green. The room falls silent. The captain stares at the edge of Avery's field notebook, where a pencil mark peeks out, 9 Delta 17. His face drains. He knows that code. He hoped never to see it again. Somewhere beyond the blast doors, a siren rips the air. Another UAV begins to drift coordinates, changing without a human hand. So who is Avery Hale, and why does E9 Delta 17 make seasoned officers afraid morning comes cold and quick at Grey Wind? Avery eats, standing up, a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hand, the smell of metal and solvent drifting in from the hangar. Her field notebook sits open beside a half-buttered toast. Between 2 pages, a creased letter from her father waits like a breath she has not finished taking. She reads the line she knows by heart. Breathe slower than fear. The ink has faded, but the steadiness in his handwriting still holds. She closes her eyes and lets the words settle one by one, like tools in a tray. Down the corridor, voices pass without stopping. Quota 1 says softly, as if stating weather. Took the shortcut, another. Answers, a shrug, pressed into a sentence. No one looks long enough to risk a conversation. That is how prejudice survives, thin, polite, and practiced. Avery threads her hair into a tighter tie, slips the steady ring back onto her finger, and turns the page of the notebook to a clean, empty square. She believes in plain truths and proven procedures. A lost link does not mean a fall. By design, the aircraft enters a fail-safe orbit or returns along a preset path. GPS jamming can skew what a map thinks is true, but an inertial navigation system will keep the bird honest for a little while by trusting momentum over noise. These are not slogans. They are handholds when the air gets loud. She thinks about the new tech's faces too young for the lines they carry, and leaves a note on the whiteboard in small, careful script. Checklist first. Opinions later. Then she wipes a circle of fog from the window with the cuff of her sleeve. Outside, the wind combs the flag until it lies flat, then lets it lift again. The base looks ordinary from here. Sun on concrete ground. Crew walking a forklift, painting slow squares across the yard. Yet everything feels tilted by a degree she cannot name. Her phone buzzes with a calendar reminder she doesn't need. 5 minutes to the big exercise. 5 minutes is a lifetime if you spend it right, and a wound if you don't. She tucks her father's letter back into its place and smooths the page with her palm as if laying down a wrinkle in time. If your worst day came back today, what would you do? The call arrives not as a trumpet, but as a clipped voice on the intercom: maintenance to ops. Ops to control threaded through the base like wire. A reconnaissance bird went down in the fog north of the ridge. It carries simulated border data, time-stamped sensor packets that matter far beyond the drill. Recovery is immediate. Do not contaminate the drive. Bring it home intact. Avery feels the room tilt by that same quiet degree. She wipes her hands on a rag that smells of solvent and cold metal, then steps into the corridor, where boots and orders cross like weather fronts. Captain Weston meets her halfway, face set. "Hale, your lead on this." The sentence lands with the weight of a file stamped and closed. There are others in the hall who want the assignment. Their glances say so. One of them, Briggs, lets a smile travel no farther than his teeth. Lead. The word taps the old bruise. Avery's thumb finds the edge of the steady ring. For a breath, the corridor becomes another place. Radios talking over one another, a valley that refuses to hold signal, a digital clock sliding past its mark by 2 seconds. Night Vantage. The name tastes like iron. She returns her hand to her side before anyone sees it shake. Copy, she says. The syllable is plain and obedient. Inside, she is sorting steps the way her father taught her. Breathe before you choose before you move. She requests Harris for the team, someone who listens on the first try and asks for a clean tool, roll, a spare data cage, and a programmer sealed in anti-static. The quartermaster nods. Paperwork follows the kit like shadow. At the north gate, the fog stands like a wall, the kind that gives sound back to you a beat too late. The ground crew hands over a position fix approximate and a caution about footing. Weston repeats the warning about the drive. Briggs calls after her soft enough to be almost kind. Try not to touch what you don't understand. The siren answers him. A second red alarm tears the quiet, which coordinates, just changed without a human hand on the system. The fog at the north gate presses close, a wall with breath. Avery signs for the kit, grips the handle, and feels the weight rise through bone. A gust lifts the flag and drops it flat again. In that small thunder of fabric, a room she's tried to keep shut swings open. Radios stepping on each other. A valley that warps echo into warning. Digital seconds sliding past a narrow window where yes becomes no. 2 beats late. 2 seconds. The strike lands where the map said empty, and men who trusted the timing never come home. Night Vantage earns its name. The aftersound is metal in the mouth that will not rinse away. Avery's hand finds the steady ring and stays there, not quite a tremor, more like a question. She could step back. Ask Weston to reassign. Write it up as best for mission. No one would fault a cautious call the morning of a major exercise. She pictures the requisition form and the blank line that would carry her signature away from the door. The fog thickens, as if to nudge her toward the office. Briggs drifts by, casual as weather. Don't touch anything else, he says, warm enough to pass for friendly. The words leave a mark anyway, a fingertip pressed into damp paint. Avery opens the field notebook. The letter waits where she left it. She reads one line, the one her father wrote the night before his last flight. Breathe slower than fear. The fog takes the sentence and gives it back softer. She closes the notebook and listens to the quiet until it settles. Breath in. Choose. Breath out. Move. She steps to the gate and checks the strap on the programmer case. The guard watches her, like a man reading weather on the skin of his hands. Avery nods. He nods back, neither blessing nor doubt, only witness. She takes one step into the white, then another, the ground changing underfoot from concrete to gravel, to the small hidden slips that make ankles honest. The radio at her shoulder cracks with a kind of urgency that has not learned to shout. Ops wants status. Weston repeats the warning about the drive. Harris jogs to catch up face-open questions held behind his teeth, the way a junior tech learns to hold them. Avery answers none aloud. She watches the fog and counts a slow 4. The valley in her memory tries to pull her back to say the clock cannot be trusted. She places a thumb on the ring and names the fear without giving it the last word. The breath after that is easier. Bootsteps approach from the rear, not the bounce of Harris. A measured weight, heel then toe, the sound of someone who has learned to carry news like cargo. Warrant Officer Pike steps out of the pale, a small anti-static envelope between 2 fingers, as if it might startle if held too tight. No greeting. He holds up the envelope so only she can see the sliver of printed label within. Found something you might need, he says, voice low. It doesn't exist on paper. A patch that should not be there, offered in the open air. Pike doesn't ask if she wants it. He simply places the anti-static envelope on her palm, as if setting down a memory that prefers quiet. Inside is a sliver of code on a sealed drive small enough to lose precise enough to matter. Your father used to say the best fix is the one that behaves like good manners, Pike says. It does what's needed, then leaves without calling attention to itself. His voice carries a calm that doesn't need volume. We flew side by side on relay nights. He trusted clocks more than luck, and breath more than clocks. Avery turns the envelope to catch what light the fog allows. What is it exactly? A firmware patch, he answers. Not a new engine, not a miracle. A polite correction inside the machine so it remembers what it was meant to do. He doesn't explain ports or loaders or the dance of handshakes. He doesn't have to. The meaning lives in the way he holds the silence afterward, as if protecting both the aircraft and the listener from unnecessary weight. Harris jogs up, breath puffing in the cold. He steadies his voice. "Ma'am, if you're taking a team, I'd like to learn. I'll carry what needs carrying. I won't talk unless you ask." The eagerness in his face sits beside something humbler, a willingness to be wrong and stay present. Avery studies him a moment, then nods. "You listen first," she says. "Everything else follows." Pike's eyes move to the fog and back. This patch isn't on any checklist, he adds almost to himself. Sometimes a system that was built honest gets confused by noise. You give it a reminder. That's all. He closes her fingers over the envelope. Use it if the bird forgets its way. Why do you have it, Warrant? The question leaves Avery before she decides whether to ask. He doesn't flinch, but he doesn't answer either. The fog folds around the pause like a hand around a match. "Long story," he says at last. "Right now you need a short one, take Harris. Keep your circle small, and don't let anyone rush your breathing." He touches 2 knuckles to the edge of her notebook, where a pencil mark waits on 9. 9, then withdraws the gesture as if it might be seen from a distance. Some marks mean more than ink. Avery slips the envelope into the inner pocket of her jacket, where body heat can keep it honest. She feels the steady ring settle again under her glove, a quiet anchor more reliable than courage. Harris shifts the pack higher on his shoulder. "I'm ready," he says, lowering his eyes, meaning it. She looks from Harris to Pike and back to the fog that keeps its own counsel. "We go light," she says. "We return heavier, but not slower." Pike gives a single nod that could be blessing or warning. They move toward the gate, 2 sets of boot prints pairing in wet gravel. Behind them, Pike remains very still, as if listening for a sound he expects and hopes not to hear. Avery senses the weight of what he didn't say and tucks it beside the code to be opened only when the air demands it. What if the person you trust also had secrets? The north gate opens like a mouth learning restraint. Fog pours through the teeth of the wire and settles on skin and canvas until everything wears the same gray. Gravel shifts a slow whisper under boots. Somewhere deep in the training valley, a line of blank shots pops and fades, the way memory pops and fades. Less a threat than a metronome keeping time for nerves. Harris walks half a step behind Avery, pack snug to his spine, breath showing in small white notes. She keeps her hands ungloved until the cold insists, then pulls the gloves on and feels the damp lay claim to the fabric at once. They leave the last floodlight behind, and the ground forgets to be level. Moss grabs at the tread. Flat stones practice treachery. Avery takes the slope in a patient zigzag toes, landing soft heels, landing certain. She listens for the quiet sounds that tell the truth, water under rock, a branch hurrying back to stillness, the small metallic cough a bird makes when it doesn't want to fly. The exercise range is built to simulate chaos, but the fog edits the plan. It puts everything in the same tense and waits to see if you'll argue. Ma'am Harris says voice low to keep heat in. If the drive casing is cracked, then we carry the whole bird. Avery answers not unkind. The ground decides how careful we need to be. She lifts a wrist and glances at the compass strip nested there, then lowers it with a nod. Listen with your feet. The fog will tell you where not to step. They crest a shoulder of rock, and the shape appears, wings crooked, like a shoulder slept on wrong nose, half buried in brush that shines with frost. The reaper looks less like a machine and more like an animal that lay down in the wrong season. Avery stops 3 steps off and lets the first picture stick. She has learned not to rush the name of a problem. Things tear when you call them by the wrong word. Harris shifts weight, eager politeness struggling against the cold. Set the perimeter, she says. He does, grateful for instruction he can hold. Avery kneels, palms on thighs, and lets her breath catch up to the valleys. She speaks softly for the air and for herself. 1, she says, and unseats the panel with a twist, made gentle by practice. 2, she rides a thumb along the pivot shaft, feeling where metal has remembered impact and misunderstood it. 3, she checks the housing, the small ribs that carry stress when pride would rather they didn't. The gloves make a small rasp against milled edges. She sets tools as if they're sentences, each one resting where the next can find it. Harris kneels across from her. His hands tremble hunger and cold taking turns. She notices without letting him see that she noticed. 3 slow breath steps, she says, as if they are part of the kit. In through the nose like you're saving heat. Hold it where your ribs widen. Out longer than in so the noise leaves first. He follows eyes on the fog. On the 3rd cycle, the shake lessens not gone, but governed like a dog that decides the leash is mutual. Good, she says. Now hold the light steady for me. The pivot shaft tells its story in a language a patient wrist can understand. It wants straightening without shame, not force. She coaxes it back with quarter turns that never threaten, then seats the bearing until it agrees. The housing is more stubborn. 1 rib has taken offense and refuses to remember it was made to carry load. She gives it a reason, a slight reseat, a corrected angle, and it forgives her. The panel returns to place with a sound that isn't quite a click, more the small yes a latch makes when it chooses to trust again. Casing looks clean. Harris says relief too quick. Looks are a kind liar, Avery answers. We'll test it with how the bird behaves. She connects the tether and watches the simple heartbeat of the interface flicker up the line. No manuals out here, no terms to argue over, just a conversation between intention and doubt. She glances at the anti-static envelope inside her jacket, but leaves it closed. Patches are for memory problems. This was a bone set and a posture corrected. Let the machine try its own name first. Ready to relink, she says, and Harris adjusts his grip on the light as if light were fragile. Relinking is a promise made twice, once to the aircraft, once to yourself. Avery brings the system out of its sulk with the patience she learned from her father when a stubborn tractor would only start if you forgot you needed to leave. Power flows. Checksums settle like dust after a door shuts. She watches the numbers, then looks away deliberately, listening for the tone under the tone. It comes in a soft climb, the kind a child makes when a song finds the right key. Hold pattern, she says more to the air than to Harris, and the bird obeys because it was built to. The green light uncurls from the corner of a status pane and finds its home. The fog notices and decides not to mind. Harris lets out a breath that was not aware it was waiting to leave. He grins and then stows the grin like a contraband joy. Ma'am, he says, you kept the light steady, she says. Machines remember that. They stand together in the hush that follows a yes. Avery places a palm on the fuselage, the way you pat a shoulder that has come through a bad night. We lift together, she says, and Harris nods, taking the weight on the quiet count of 3 people used for furniture and favors. The Reaper is not small, but relief has its own pulley. The walk back chooses a different path. Fog thickens where it decides you've earned mystery thins, where it concedes a small grace. Avery keeps her stride true, a portable horizon in each step. She rehearses the report she'll give the plain verbs, the nouns that neither accuse nor apologize. Harris asks carefully, "What made the shaft bind impact? Taught it the wrong lesson," she says. We taught it back. He takes this as if he will need the sentence later, and he will. Halfway to the gate, the tether chirps with a note that isn't in the normal register. Avery pauses. Harris kills his light, and the world becomes one thing. She brings up the log and reads it the way you read a pulse, watching the spaces between beats. They're faint as pencil on rain paper. A string steps across a few lines and disappears. E9. It has the humility of a mark left for yourself and the audacity of a message left for someone who might not be you. Avery closes the display, opens it again, and the string is gone, or hiding. The fog takes a step closer, interested. She looks at Harris and sees he has not seen that his face is still the face of a man who kept a light steady and wants to tell someone. "Good work," she says, which is a way to postpone questions without wasting courage. They walk on the bird between them, the weight a conversation their shoulders can finish later. At the fence line, the floodlights resume their habit of pretending things are simple. The sirens are quiet for now. The green light holds, and somewhere in the scroll of a machine that only admits what it must a faint E9 has signed the air and walked away. The hangar swallows them back with its clean light and the dry smell of aluminum. They set the bird on a cradle, and for a moment, the room agrees to be ordinary. Then the control room door opens and lets disorder out. Voices stack, screens flare, a map crawls with cursors that look too sure of themselves. Avery signs the handoff, then keeps the tether long enough to pull the flight log on a side console. She reads it the way a nurse reads a pulse, not for drama, for rhythm. There it is again, faint, almost polite E9, stepping through a handful of lines before it dissolves like chalk in rain. No error flag. No signature a checklist would recognize. Just a footprint where footprints should not be. "Control needs you," someone says, already gone. Inside, the big wall display paints the training valley in greens and creams. One UAV feed jitters like a hand that had coffee for lunch. Its coordinates jump 2 grid squares, then snap back, then jump again. A platoon icon, blue, neat, unafraid, marches along a line the machine now insists is safe. GPS drift, a tech calls out hopeful. "Not drift," Avery answers. "Spoof." Drift wanders. Spoof insists. She steps to an open station and drops her field notebook beside the keyboard palm still warm from the valley. "Who's accepting packets from outside the white list?" "We don't use one," the tech says, and he's not wrong on paper in peacetime. "We do now." She builds it as she speaks, a small fence with known gates. Good packets are people you vouch for by name. Everything else can wait in the hall. She lists the sources that belong here, the channels that have earned trust. Then she closes the other doors, not with a slam, but with a latch you have to want to open. Forged packets arrive, as if nothing has changed, and find only their own echoes. The map steadies. The jitter quiets. The blue platoon continues on its path, unaware of the hand that just took a knife away from the table. Stabilized, the tech reports, relief giving him back an inch of height. Captain Weston watches without moving jaw, set soft enough to pass for neutral. "Lucky timing," he says, which is another way to doubt. "We'll need to review your access, Hale. Review it," she says. Not unkind, The fence will hold either way. Briggs leans on a rack where leaning looks like work. Sir, there's a file he offers casual as weather. Warrant Officer Pike had a procurement irregularity last quarter. Something about a missing container. If rogue packets got in, maybe they had help. He lets the words drift toward Avery, as if they were no one's. Weston takes them without committing to ownership. We'll look at everything. Avery feels the room turn a degree colder. She thinks of the anti-static envelope in her jacket and keeps her hand away from it. Harris stands at her shoulder like a comma present. Necessary, not yet a period. He sees Weston's doubt and swallows his own. On the main map, the blue platoon approaches a narrow saddle between two low rises. The ground there is a rumor of safety. Any table could tell you it's the shortest route. The spoofed grid would shepherd them right through. Avery leans in until the pixels dissolve, and all that remains is the shape of a mistake she has met before. Hold them, she says. We don't have authority to a controller starts. You have a duty not to let a lie draw a straight line. She answers, voice still calm. Compare their pace to their reported ground speed. It doesn't match. INS says they're slower than the map claims. They're climbing, not crossing. The controller runs the overlay. The numbers disagree politely then clearly. The INS, the quiet friend that trusts momentum over noise, argues for caution. Redirect them along the contour, Avery says. Make the valley a wall, not a door. Ma'am, the exercise plan. Plans don't mind being wrong. People do. The order goes out with the brittle conviction of a message that has to arrive before certainty does. The blue icon hesitates, pivots in a small disciplined arc, and finds the safer line. 2 minutes later, a simulated kill zone blooms, where they were meant to pass pure training, pure math, still mean. In the control room, the breath people didn't know they held returns to the business of being air. Platoon saved, someone says, unable to help the word. Saved is a big verb for a drill, but the heart measures what it measures. Weston's face softens, then tightens again, as if respect were a muscle not yet confident in its job. Log your changes, he says to Avery. And I still want that access review. Yes, sir. Briggs offers a slow clap. He doesn't finish. Good instincts, he says, eyes kind, tone not. Shame about the company you keep. Pike isn't in the room to defend himself. His absence works like an accusation because absence often does. Harris looks from the captain to Briggs, then to Avery. He is learning how doubt travels not as a shout, as a suggestion that believes it is doing you a favor. Avery turns back to the fence she built and tightens 2 posts no one else will notice. She does not argue. Arguments are loud and fragile. Fences are quiet and stubborn. The room begins to clean itself of panic, the way a tide recovers from stone. Screens return to their modest colors. Headsets sit more comfortably on ears. Someone makes a joke about coffee that doesn't quite land, but also doesn't fall. The drill resumes a shape that can pass for planned. Harris steps out to fetch a fresh roll of labels. The corridor is cooler, lonelier, lit in a narrow way that turns dust into constellations. Past the spare racks, past the caged lockers, the reserve bay waits with its hush. He rounds the corner and stops. Briggs stands with his back half-turned, shoulders making a wall where there should be a window. His hand moves with the easy confidence of a man plugging in his own phone to charge. The little flash of metal, the small click. A USB slips into a port that wears the same white paint as every other innocent surface. Briggs glances once left, and right the glance of a person who trusts that cameras are facing the more expensive problems. Harris does not breathe for a count of 3. He hears his own pulse in his ears and sets it down gently. The labels in his hand become a reason to be there. He passes by at the pace of a man who has always been passing by. Briggs steps away from the rack, as if he had only brushed against it in thought. Their eyes meet and don't linger. Back in the control room, Harris doesn't blurt. He puts the labels where labels go, then finds Avery's shoulder, with a look, not a word. She reads it and files it beside the faint E9 and the fence, and the doubt, and the platoon that now lives to run another drill. It is not proof. It is a string waiting for a knot. Somewhere under all the light, the room keeps breathing. Somewhere in the reserve bay, a small, uninvited thing decides whether it can become a bigger one. The first siren is a shout. The second is a verdict. They strike across Greywind in clean red bands that paint concrete and faces the same urgent color. Doors open. Headsets rise. The map on the main wall grows a tremor. 10 simulated birds that had been flying, as one begin to disagree with themselves, bearing altitude timestamps. Signals bounce like light off broken water. Avery is already moving. She takes the near console and opens the channels the way you open windows, after smoke, fast, then measured. The whitelist fence she built holds steady. Forged packets stack up outside, angry but harmless. This is different. The rod is not knocking at the door. It is already in the room. Back door, she says, quiet enough that the word doesn't startle the others. Not outside in, inside out. On her screen telemetry, once smooth as a hymn, now jitters in a particular stutter, the kind that tries to hide under its own average. She pulls a slice of packets and reads the comments, and spacing the way a musician reads rests. Style lives in the pauses as much as in the notes. Whoever wrote this left tiny habits, doubled spaces after slashes, a fondness for certain variable names that pretend to be jokes. She has seen that handwriting before in the margins of maintenance scripts and helpful notes taped to racks. The shape of it looks like Briggs, but logs tell a different story. Access trails route through Pike's terminal through a timestamp that sits too neatly inside his shift, through a badge swipe that could have been his, unless you remember he was standing with her in the fog. A plant, she thinks. Someone put his footprints on a floor he never walked. Weston watches the map tilt and tries to keep his face from following. Contain it, we will, Avery says, and makes the words sound like a plan, not a hope. The swarm's AI tries to self-correct and only proves it is confused. Left-wing drones roll to follow a ghost vector. Right-wing drones chase a timestamp that is honest, but wrong. The center pair hold formation as if stubbornness were a virtue. If this were live, real ground would be under those lines. Real skin. Real promise. Avery drills down to the time base. The problem is small and mean, packet timestamps nudged just beyond tolerance. So each unit trusts what it hears from the others, less than it trusts itself. Consensus fails. Harmony unwinds. The back door doesn't shout. It whispers comparisons into being. That is always the cleverness, make truth disagree with itself, and watch discipline do the rest. She thinks of night vantage and the clock that slid by 2 seconds in a valley that didn't forgive math. For an instant the room fades and the taste of iron returns. She places her palm over the steady ring and closes her eyes long enough to hear a sentence she has carried longer than regret. Breathe slower than fear. The breath comes in slower. The fear doesn't leave, but it loses the right to choose the next move. She opens her eyes and sketches the attack in plain words for the team. They're inserting tiny delays, she says. Not enough to fail checks enough to erode trust between nodes. Each drone believes the others are late. The formation breaks to protect itself. Can we roll back? A controller asks. Not without rolling back good data, Avery says. We need a clean clock the network will believe. Harris moves closer, shoulders squared to borrow steadiness. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we give them a chorus they can't outvote. She calls up a tool she built years ago and never named out loud, a habit learned from her father. The best work doesn't need a label. It is not a weapon. It is a metronome with authority. But she pauses before she clicks, because the name she didn't give it has one she can no longer avoid. Eagle 9, her pencil mark, the captain's pale face. She set the first stones of this path when she was young and sure, and believed that clocks were kinder than men. She doesn't deploy it yet. Not here, not without clearance. She gathers proof while her hands want to move. Trace sources again, Weston orders, leaning hard on the only lever he trusts. We'll get the same answer, Avery says, because someone wants us to. Look at the swipe records. Pike's badge pings this wing while he's logged onto a camera 3 buildings away. She brings up the feed. Pike waiting by the north gate, the timestamp tucked into the corner, like a signature too shy to be forged well. If he's in 2 places at once, he's either guilty of talent or someone else is guilty of laziness. Briggs makes a soft sound, half laugh, half cough. Convenient timing, he says, rehearsing doubt as if it were duty. Convenient would be if we ignored it. Avery replies, then lets the line end there. The swarm wobbles again. One drone climbs to avoid a phantom. Another skews left to keep station with a partner it no longer believes is where the math says. The shape on the wall is an argument drawing itself with expensive pens. Avery sets her jaw and speaks to Harris without looking away from the screen. If I can give them a reference they trust, the flock will come back to itself. How, he asks? By reminding them what time really is. She slides the patch from her pocket with a movement so small it could be a breath. The envelope is warm now, the way things get when carried close to skin. She thinks of Pike's face and the word he didn't say. She thinks of her father, thumbs stained with graphite, explaining that clocks are not rulers. They are instruments, and instruments need tuning. Captain, she says, I can propose a corrective. It will partition a reserve channel and impose a verified time base for synchronization. It doesn't rewrite their minds. It tells them together what second they are in. Weston does not like giving permission he cannot own, but he likes the screen less. You'll be responsible, he says. Yes. Document every change. I will. He hesitates. And if it fails, we will fail slower, Avery says, and that will be enough to stop the harm. Silence considers that and decides to let it stand. She doesn't press enter. Not yet. She needs one more sign that the harm is what she thinks it is. She opens the logs in raw view and searches for a fingerprint she hopes not to find the doubled spaces after slashes the variable nicknames that try too hard to be clever. There, and there. The hand she suspected has left its cramped humor in 3 places you would only see if you liked reading what other people skip. She marks them. She prints nothing. She tucks the knowledge behind her ribs where breath can protect it. Harris leans in. Ma'am. She answers him with the smallest nod a student can see, and a saboteur can't. Her finger rests over the key that will wake a system she built in another life. What exactly is Eagle 9, and why is Delta 17 the hinge on which this whole room might turn? The swarm forgets how to sing. On the wall, 10 aircraft that should breathe in one chest now stumble on 10 separate ribs, left wing, sliding late right wing, answering early. The center pair, stubborn, as old men who won't change their chairs. Bearings drift, a hair altitudes wobble by a breath, timestamps argue about what second they're in. If this were live, that argument would be measured in skin and promises. In simulation, it still counts, because habit becomes doctrine if you let it. Avery feels the room lean toward panic and refuses to follow. Harris, she says, auxiliary channel is yours. You don't talk unless I ask. You watch for anything that tries to pretend it belongs. Yes, ma'am. He takes the seat to her left. Shoulders, squared hands quiet on the controls, the way a good helper holds a ladder and becomes the ground. On Avery's screen, the consensus protocol gnaws at itself. The back door isn't hurling stones. It's salting the clock, tiny delays that look innocent alone and treacherous together. She brings up the tool she hasn't called by name in years, the one that knows how to tell time loudly enough for doubt to hear. Eagle 9 waits behind a confirmation window, like a promise she once made, and never broke in public. Partition the reserve channel, she says. We'll give them a clean lane they can't confuse with noise. Harris opens the lane like a careful zipper. Avery maps the swarm onto it, without fanfare, 2 at a time, so the river doesn't notice it's changing banks. We'll impose a time lock, she adds, and I'll take manual on the 2 leads. Weston hovers behind a man, not ready to bless and not brave enough to forbid. You're certain this won't brick my exercise? It will either make them better or make them honest, Avery says. Honest is enough. Her fingers rest over the keys. The old bruise stirs. Night vantage the clock that slid by. 2 seconds the valley that punished math and mercy equally. She feels the fear knock polite as a debt collector. She does not invite it in. She sets her thumb on the steady ring and whispers, where only breath can hear. Breathe slower than fear. She presses enter. The reserve channel accepts the first pair like a hospital bed that knows its job. The time lock drops in behind them with the weight of a metronome and the grace of a second hand that doesn't stutter. Avery takes manual on lid 1, and lid 2 hands steady eyes, soft enough to see motion instead of numbers. Harris rides the auxiliary, calling out nothing, because nothing is the right thing to say. Time bass is the choir's pitch, Avery says, for the room and for the record. If each singer hums to themselves, the song tears. Give them one note they trust. She moves the leads not by yanking, but by inviting. The rest of the formation feels the invitation in the bones of the protocol and tries to remember how to follow. A pair on the left still doubts and drifts. The right rear unit clings to a timestamp that has been sweetened by the saboteur. She lets them be wrong for one more beat, long enough for the time lock to show them a better truth. Hold pattern, she murmurs to the formation, to the code, maybe to herself. When the world lies, you circle until it stops. A hold pattern is a disciplined waiting room in the sky, an agreed-upon loop that keeps aircraft safe, while decisions learn how to be right. A red hash flares where a wrong target could be the kind of decoy that flatters your hunger to finish. INS numbers come in like an old friend who drives the long way home to avoid black ice. INS believes what momentum says. GPS believes what space tells it. When space is noisy, momentum keeps you honest for a while. Ma'am Harris says voice low right rear is still a half beat late. I see it. She adds a correction to the time lock, not a shove, an invitation to step in rhythm. The delay she chooses is not random. She dials it like a safe Delta 17. 17 milliseconds, the private hinge between a choir and a crowd, the difference between a hand that lands on a shoulder and one that startles the bone. The number carries the shape of a lesson she learned the loud way and has been teaching back to herself ever since. Lead 1 answers. Lead 2 affirms, and the formation breathes together for the first time in minutes. On the wall, the ragged line pulls itself taut, a seam learning to be fabric again. The simulated target runs in the valley like a rumor growing legs. The swarm slides into a geometry that makes sense to the part of the eye that recognizes grace. Harris exhales a syllable he didn't know he was holding. Manual override steady, Avery says. Time lock anchored. Auxiliary quiet. Auxiliary quiet. Harris confirms the best words a helper can offer. For a breath, the score in the room drops to a murmur. You can hear the fans. You can hear the heart. Avery moves the leads a hair to the left, then holds, then lets the rest catch up. She doesn't chase perfection. She invites agreement. Delta 17 milliseconds remains the fulcrum. The swarm balances there like a table that finally found the missing coaster under its short leg. On the map, a kill box opens, where the decoy would have tempted a younger team. The formation refuses the flattery and paints the true target with the calm of people who have buried enough noise to recognize the shape of quiet. Weston's shoulders come down the width of a breath. Someone in the back puts a hand to their mouth and forgets to finish the gesture. Avery gives Harris the nod only 2 people in the room understand. He shifts power on the auxiliary and trims the fence she built earlier, whitelist still tight-forged packets, still knocking on a door that has learned to say no, politely and forever. She adjusts lead 1 by a whisper and watches lead 2 compensate without complaint. The rest of the flock settles into the math as if the math were a hammock they had forgotten they owned. Lock, she says. Green crosses bloom with the matter-of-fact joy of lights on a porch that finally comes home. The swarm holds. The simulated target is boxed, not in a way that gloats, in a way that concludes. The room does not cheer, not at first. It remembers itself, then remembers relief, then chooses gratitude. Weston's mouth tries on a compliment and doesn't choke on it. Harris looks sideways without turning his head. Ma'am. The number. 17. 17 is how long it takes for the ear to forgive the clock she answers, mouth barely moving. It's the room between panic and choice. He won't forget that. The last jitter settles. The back door's little lies lose leverage against a choir that agrees to be one voice. Eagle 9 stays quiet now that it has tuned the instruments. Good manners, as Pike said. The manual overrides ease back, and the leads hold their posts without being held. The reserve channel keeps its shape like a lake you teach not to ripple. Weston clears his throat the closest he gets to thanks. Exercise saved, he says to the air. To the report he will have to write to the mirror he will look into later. Document the intervention. I will, Avery says. She lets her hands rest flat on the console palms, down heat bleeding into metal. The room has breath again. The map looks the way a plan hopes to look. Somewhere between the first enter and this quiet second, a loop finally closes. Delta 17 milliseconds is not a rumor or a superstition. It is the tactical legacy she proposed when she was younger, and the same person a way to keep a choir in time when liars come for the clock. She had tried to leave it nameless, because names can be taken. Today it spoke for itself, and did not ask permission. Breathe slower than fear, she whispers once more, in case the room needs the words as much as she does. The swarm holds. The target is locked. The exercise loves to be debriefed. And in the space where dread used to sit, something steadier takes its chair. The door opens without drama, and the air changes. A tall man with steel-gray hair and a quiet stride steps in and lets the room see him before he speaks. General Maxton does not waste adjectives. He studies the map, the settled lines, the green confirmations that mean lives in a different world, then looks at Avery as if locating a star he once used to steer. Eagle 9. He says more identification than praise. The framework you drafted when you still believed minutes were generous. We shelved it because people prefer manuals to metronomes. Today you proved the metronome keeps better time. Avery feels the ring cool against her skin. She says nothing. Maxton's voice softens by a degree. I know why you left the front line, Lieutenant Hale. Night Vantage was a wound that refused discharge. You stepped back so others wouldn't bleed where your name lived. He nods toward the screens. Today you stepped forward and gave the room back its clock. Captain Weston stands straighter, as if formality can bridge the remaining distance. "Ma'am." He stops, corrects. "General." Then he turns to Avery. The pause is not for effect. It is to gather words that won't cheapen themselves. "Hale, I judged you by what I thought I knew. I'm sorry." He says it plainly, then leaves it standing where everyone can see it. Silence holds testing the truth of what has been said. It holds long enough to be real. Then one pair of hands claps soft, almost private. Another follows. The sound spreads in small islands until it becomes a weather system, uneven and honest. It is not a cheer. It is an acknowledgement. Avery inclines her head once and lets it wash past. Maxton's gaze flicks to the notebooks on her console, to the pencil mark that once turned a captain pale. "You kept a good idea humble," he says. "That's rarer than brilliance." He looks back to the wall. "Lock in the after action. We'll brief higher. For now, keep your choir singing." The room exhales. Harris allows himself a smile that belongs to a younger man and to the old men who trained him. Pike is not here to share it. His absence leaves a contour in the light. Briggs lingers at the edge of the map's glow hands, loose eyes too careful. The exercise breathes as if it might be finished. But what if the nightmare still has one more layer? Relief is a door that swings both ways. 30 minutes after the room remembers how to breathe, a faint alarm stirs like a kettle left on a back burner. Not the wall sirens, those scream. This one taps glass with a fingernail. Harris tilts his head. Auxiliary just flagged a process I don't recognize. Avery leans in. On the reserve array, quiet, obedient, warm from use, a dormant routine has woken itself with a polite cough. It's small, almost thoughtful, a scheduled task, nested in a maintenance check, the sort of thing you trust because it borrowed a trusted name. It reaches for auto-run the way a hand reaches for a doorknob it remembers. Timed malware, Avery says. Someone planted a seed and told it when to sprout. She isolates the segment as if moving a fragile jar to a safer shelf. No heroics, just practiced care. The monitor traces the first hop back through the network like thread returning to its spool. The path does not wander. It draws a line to a terminal in the reserve bay and writes a name in small, precise letters. Briggs Ops 3. Weston's jaw tightens. Lock the bay. Before the order finishes, the reserve door opens. Briggs steps through too calm, too quick, and heads for the rack that owns the drive. His hand goes to his hip and returns with a gun, the movement neat as if he's rehearsed it for years, in mirrors with no opinions. He isn't wild. He is efficient. He angles toward the housing panel not to aim at people, but to make the evidence vanish into a useful silence. Briggs Weston says, warning and plea. Briggs doesn't slow. Hardware fault, he says, as if narrating a training tape, preventing collateral damage. Avery moves into the doorway, not blocking shaping. Put it down, she says, voice low. Don't make the room choose between your pride and its safety. For a heartbeat, the world narrows to a grip and a target, and the pride of a man who built his own corner out of shadows. Then, a white flash splits the dim like a small, tame lightning. Harris stands 10 feet away, phone in both hands, the way a choir boy holds his hymnal. The photo he just took floats on the screen. Briggs, earlier back, turned the silver of a USB catching the strip light. Dust motes frozen midair, like proof that time sometimes stands still for the right witness. Pattern interrupt. The room goes quiet enough to hear dust fall. Harris doesn't raise his voice. You plugged it in, he says simply. I saw you. Pike appears at the far door, drawn by the alarm, and the kind of instinct that finds trouble by listening to how silence changes. He doesn't shout. He closes distance, like a man finishing a thought. His hand lands on Briggs's wrist. not bone-hard, tendon-true. The weapon tilts off its purpose and surrenders to the floor with a sound that doesn't echo because the room won't let it. Security takes the space that opens. Cuffs. A step back. The choreography of consequence. Briggs looks to Weston for a rope that won't be thrown. He finds none. He looks to Avery for permission to rewrite the last minute. She doesn't offer it. Pride searches for a higher ground and finds the floor. Isolate the terminal, Avery says, and the team moves power down at the strip, yank the network cap, the ports. She slides on a new pair of gloves, the blue kind that rustle like careful rain, and covers the drive with a shield so it will remember itself long enough to tell the truth later. No wipes, no formats. We hold it as it is. Weston gives the order to log everything from the door latch to the dust. Harris forwards the photo to the evidence vault, hands shaking now that they are allowed to. Pike stands off to the side and watches what he saved become official. Briggs tries a last angle. He forged the logs, he says, chin toward the absent Pike. You'll see. We will. Weston answers to his credit. It is a promise to the process, not to Briggs. Avery steps close enough to see the human in the saboteur and the saboteur in the human. You almost made the lie beautiful, she says. Tiny delays, familiar names, scheduled patience. But you forgot the oldest rule. Briggs meets her eyes despite the cuffs. And what rule is that noise can't keep time, she says. It can only borrow it. The technicians finish the quarantine. The reserve array sits under a sudden hush, like a piano, with its lid closed in a house where people are finally sleeping. On the wall, the swarm holds formation, as if loyalty were muscle memory. In the doorway, Harris lowers his phone and releases a breath that shakes once and stops. Pike looks at Avery, and there's thanks in it. He won't say while the room is watching. Mini-climax achieved. The weapon is gone. The drive is safe. The man is contained. The exercise continues to breathe. Interrogation lights are for shows. Truth prefers ordinary bulbs. In the control room, Avery lays 3 simple lines on the table: badge swipes, camera time, and the shape of code. Swipe records insist Pike was on this wing. The camera says he was at the north gate at the same second, the timestamp stamped like a quiet witness. And the code, its little jokes, its doubled spaces after slashes, belongs to the same hand that was just led away in cuffs. Briggs tried to make the lie beautiful. He stole Pike's old maintenance logs, copied comments, and planted them where a lazy glance would land. But he misunderstood the heart of the system he wanted to impersonate. He thought Delta 17 was a flourish in a margin. He never learned it is a time-offset lock, a hinge that lets clocks agree without shouting. When Avery asks him what Delta 17 corrects, he says, drift. The room hears the wrongness. Drift wanders. A lock anchors. He has exposed the seam in his training and the hole in his plan. General Maxton listens to the short version, asks 2 clarifying questions, and nods once as if closing a ledger. Arrest him formally, he says. Hold the hardware as evidence. Clear Pike in the interim. The order arrives without ceremony, which is how you know it will hold. Avery turns back to the reserve array. The seed Briggs left has a second germination, a courtesy call at a later hour. She opens a terminal and does what gardeners do when they find bad roots. Reroute the water, starve the weed. She patches the root table so the scheduled task cannot reach the corridor. It expected, then disables auto-run for the branch that carried its name. No thunder, no flourish. The process looks for air and finds a jar with the lid on. She logs every step with language that will still be honest tomorrow. Harris stands behind her, like a pillar that remembers rain. Pike watches from the side and doesn't try to fill the silence. Weston signs the chain of custody with the face of a man paying a debt. The room goes still. Not dramatic, just still. Heads tilt, shoulders settle, breath evens. In the quiet, you can hear the cooling fans, a soft, faithful weather turning heat into harmless wind. For the first time all day, the map looks like a map and not a question. Pike meets Avery's eyes. No speech, just the kind of nod men give when the worst thing didn't happen. She rests her hand over the steady ring, then lifts it away, as if returning a small bird to air. Dusk lowers itself over gray wind, like a hand smoothing a sheet. The valley's edges soften. The towers lose their angles and learn to breathe. Overhead, the swarm rises in a practice parade, not to show off, but to remember, to feel the comfort of formation now that time has been tuned. Their lights move in unison, small green affirmations stitching the sky. On the apron, technicians watch with the quiet pride of people who mend what others rely on. A young woman stands a step apart, hair tucked back, eyes lifted as if counting stars. Avery walks to her without hurry, the day finally allowing footsteps to be only footsteps. You held the board steady when the packets were loud, Avery says. I saw you. The young tech blushes the way dawn blushes, sudden then modest. I was only doing my part. That's how the big parts are done, Avery answers. She slides the steady ring from her finger. The metal has warmed to her. It will learn someone else soon. Don't stand like me, she says, placing the ring into a palm that opens, as if it already knew how. Stand taller. No speech about destiny. No weighted ceremony. Just a gift handed over in ordinary light, which is the best light for gifts. The young woman closes her fingers and looks as if the ground has leveled by half an inch. I don't know if I'm ready, she says. No one is, Avery replies. That's why we practice. She turns to the horizon, where the parade draws clean lines that mean nothing and everything. A life is built from such lines, discipline made into dignity, mistakes admitted without making a home out of them, the hard art of forgiving yourself so you can be useful again. Her father's words stand beside her, not as ghosts, but as tools. Breathe slower than fear. Avery nods to Harris, to Pike, to Weston even. Not benediction, not farewell, just acknowledgments that the room learned something true today and agreed to keep it. Then she faces the camera that isn't there, but always is, and speaks to the people on the other side of the glass. If this story sat with you, she says, voice warm and slow, stay with us. Like if it helped. Share if it might help someone you love. Comment with a moment when you were underestimated and what you did next. Subscribe if you want more quiet victories, more clocks made, honest, more reminders that courage can be taught. The swarm finishes its sweep and eases home. The last light clicks to amber, then rests. For those who want the lesson beneath the story, 17 milliseconds sounds small. It is not. In formations that depend on agreement, timing is oxygen. Delta 17 milliseconds is a time offset lock, a careful nudge that brings clocks back to the same second, so trust can resume its work. Without that lock, good machines misjudge faithful partners, and careful people make rushed choices. A lost link does not mean a fall. Well-made aircraft keep a promise. When the radio goes quiet, they orbit safely or fly a preset path home. Panic breaks more birds than physics. Knowing the difference turns emergencies into procedures. And breathing is not poetry here. It is discipline. A slow breath lengthens the moment between stimulus and response. In that widened space, you can choose the right checklist, the right word, the right mercy. The human time base set by breath lets every other clock in the room find its place. Carry this with you, then test it where life gets loud. In simulated war or real life, the killer isn't slowness, it's the illusion that you still have time.